Like, I recorded this morning, and then Paul is like, I can't find your recording. I'm like, I swear I recorded to the cloud, but I will check. I swear I did. I swear I did. All right, I'm gonna pull up our article. We had some really good conversations this morning about responsible global leadership and um, dissecting that terminology, and say responsible leader versus global leader. And is that any different in a global context, a responsible leader? So I've highlighted a couple things that I just want to, even if you haven't had a chance to read the article and read it later this week, I still highlighted some things that I think are, even by themselves, still very understandable and digestible, and something that we can use for discussion. So one of the things that, well, I'll come back to these two questions, but what's really interesting are these 7 dimensions that they came up with as to the different challenges that global leaders, so you'll notice they don't necessarily say responsible global leaders at this point, but global leaders face on a regular basis. And actually, this article is not that like recent, and I still think some of these are very poignant still, and very relevant. So they identified these seven different issues, and I wanted to start with those in terms of, are there some now from that list that are more important given contexts, have changed slightly in our context, especially, we, now that we're kind of living with COVID, um, or some that aren't relevant. I couldn't really, or no one really came up with any that weren't relevant in total. But then I, challenged the question of, is there anything missing from those 7, as well? And so that's where I wanted to get us started. With those 7, kind of, what are your initial takes? Are there some that you feel are priority? Some that are maybe less priority when it comes to global leadership? Anything missing or should be taken off the list?
Well, I didn't read the article yet, so I'm just like by going off of what the dimensions are and the bullets, and like the quick, like the skimming through essentially. I am curious about having like more stakeholders, especially because of the labs that we're doing in ACC 603 and like from last semester too, like, well, I'm not sure about that. But and that's also, the way that you define stakeholders and whatnot, just because I think originally I would tend to lean like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's get people involved. Let's see, like, have different perspectives. But and maybe that's part of what makes a good leader. Like, you can still have a lot of stakeholders and be able to kind of make that executive decision or most informed decision. But also like how that can cause other challenges along the way. So like, yes, it is important to make sure people are included, but I guess a more in-depth look at like what stakeholder means or what they're stakeholders of, if that like makes sense in the context. But that's what I would say from like the general.
Yeah, there's a lot of heavy emphasis when it comes to seed scale on stakeholders and who is part of your LCC. And to make sure that all voices are part of the conversation when you're addressing an issue so that a solution can be determined. So, I mean, if you are dealing with, say, a lack of access to clean water in your town, and you neglect to include, I don't know, the local butcher, or I'm trying to think of others that use water, say in like a smaller kind of village setting. Um, but that's, let's say you've left out or let's just say all of like the vendors at the farmer's market or a local market on Saturdays where people go and get their fresh produce and meat and whatnot. There's a whole group of people that aren't helping you address the issue where water may be an essential resource for them. Or, yeah, so it's, yeah, in seed scale, that stakeholder piece has a very different feel
Mm-hmm.
than, like, a lot of what the article does focus on is from a business perspective and from an
Mm-hmm.
or larger organizational perspective. When if you're trying to implement seed scale on a more local level, stakeholder is a totally different
Yeah.
meaning.
And I can see that, how that would be important. And I think that's also maybe something I'm don't even have as much experience with. So it was like, okay, going into seed scale thinking, yeah, you need money, you need this, like that's
Mm-hmm.
what a stakeholder is, versus kind of having to learn it in a different sense of, you know, your community members a stakeholder, this, but those people are actual like also stakeholders in a different way. Um, and to work backwards, I do like the idea of the greater need for broad knowledge that
Mm-hmm.
spans functions and nations. Like, not really sure necessarily the functions and nations piece, like if I'm how I'm taking that, but just great broader knowledge. I'm thinking more of like not well-rounded, but the sense of like just knowing a lot of things, more like uh greater like liberal arts type of thing than a very specific funneled
Trade.
expertise. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is like, yes, that's important, but I'm trying to think of like a concrete example, but I just feel like in my experience of like either work or volunteer, any opportunities, people who kind of have a more holistic education too, maybe if that makes sense,
Mm-hmm.
you're able to kind of see from a lot of different perspectives as well. And like that's what really part of it is, maybe the broader knowledge
Mm-hmm.
perspective piece, rather than people who might be like an expert in one thing. And that also depends on different fields and stuff, because I know
Sure.
a lot of like social services field and things, there's like you can be educated, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're an expert.
Right.
So like that's that's important.
Well, what we had this morning too is I brought up the broader knowledge as well to say, yes, it's still important to have knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
But our ability to access information to gain knowledge is very different
Mm-hmm.
now than it was even just
Yes.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
Which does, brought up the conversation around access. Like, yes, the three of us can go online on our phones, on our laptops, iPads, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and get exactly what we need. If we don't know how to do something, we can go watch YouTube. We can go Google it.
Yeah.
Maybe that access is a little bit more strained in, say, a rural community, even in the US, but then you're talking like, say, a rural community in Africa. You might
Mm-hmm.
be talking several hours to be able to access a decent connection, but you still have a cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, one of
and
the things we learned last semester, if you remember, Carissa, was also in communications that
Mm-hmm.
messaging has to be very unique for different target audiences, and that
Mm-hmm.
brings up the importance of how what is being the theme that you're seeing in these different bullets here, right? Um, what's being kind of the thread that is being mentioned here is that you really have to have a good understanding from a variety of different perspectives, because there is no way in the world that you're going to have a good idea, and also you have to have a very broad scope because the narrower you make it, the more likely you're going to leave someone out. So don't try to make it too narrow. Try to keep it broad and keep it very high level. And that's, so let's use the example of something that the school actually had a hand in, or the founders of the Sustainable Development Goals. So very high level, very broad, and just very idealistic, right? So 17 goals, and very simple to look at too, right? And so this is the vision. He pinned it at it, and then if you look at it, then right, you can individualize it per country. Each country, and then each community can break it down and make it work per their locality, right? That's the beauty of it, right? So I think at the high level, they can take it at it as something that's global goals. But then as you focus it down, you can say, what does it mean to you?
Right.
And so I think that's the key thing, is how do you make these goals and decisions that are far reaching, but at the same time do not step on anybody's toes. Right? So that's the key thing. And that's actually the 17th goal, partnering with others, partnering with existing organizations. And that's the key thing. That's the linchpin in the SDGs.
Well, and what we had a really hard time with this morning is talking about ethical dilemmas. And even what is ethical is a very like local country, kind of issue to say what might be acceptable and ethical in Chad is going to be very different than, say, Chile, which is going to be very different from Canada. It's just
that term is called ethnocentric, right? Like, how do I view something from my own perspective, and that may not be quite the same in another culture, right?
Right.
That's offensive in one, like, so here's an example, Erica, scouting, right? Shaking with the left hand. So I was just reading this the other day. Why did Baden Powell do it with the left hand? So it had something to do with the Zulu warrior. They had the shield in their left hand. So by lowering their shield and using their left hand, it kind of made them a little bit vulnerable. So that's why they did it with the left hand. Now, you do that in the Islamic culture and you use the left hand, it's kind of considered offensive because the left hand is the hand that's used for cleaning oneself. So they consider that's a little offensive. But it's also told in the scouting books, but this is left hand is closest to your heart, right? So here's a real world, something came up. There was a pastor who there was two guys who came to our mosque several years back from Africa. I'm trying to remember the nation they came from. But I do know that this pastor and this imam, they were part of two warring factions. And it just turned out that the pastor had his hand cut off literally by the group that this imam at one point was in charge of. So somebody in his group, they were fighting, and the hand got cut off during an excursion. So when he came, the imam's hand, he was wearing a prosthetic hand. So when I went up to the imam to greet him, the pastor, he said, "I'm sorry, I can't shake you with my right hand. I can only shake with the left hand." So I said to him, that's fine. I'll shake you with the left hand. I'm a scout. So he was trying not to be offensive because he knew, because he was with Muslims and he knew that Muslims would find it offensive. So, but instead what I did is I said, listen, I knew your story. I just heard about it, but let me turn it around and just say, I'm going to embrace you and say, because of scouting, we shake with the left hand, and that's closest to the heart, to make him feel good.
Mm-hmm.
So I turned it around on him to embrace him with that. So I think that's the kind of thing to what folks can do to overcome it. I mean, I didn't have to take offense or anything like that. I mean, these days people are washing their hands,
No, right.
So, I mean, that's a cultural thing, and we can be big about it, right? So nobody has to take offense.
Yeah.
But I think that's their way of looking at stuff. How do we come across and have that bigger picture? I'm not saying that the guy who's the Bedouin out in the desert would probably be able to overcome that, but those who are, this is not an article about the Bedouin guy who's out in the desert. This is an article about a global leader.
Yeah. No, it helps frame the conversation when, like, it's almost like you hate to admit, like, well, this conversation doesn't include this group of people. But seed scale would also challenge that eventually that's going to no longer be the case. But for now, that may be the case. Yeah, so the ethical dilemma part was very much a topic this morning that came up, as well as ambiguity and comparing ambiguity to being flexible, and the difference between them. They're like, well, ambiguity sounds negative, where flexibility sounds positive. I said, well, ambiguity is like not knowing the unknown, like of what to expect, as opposed to being flexible and saying, okay, here's what this is or that is, and we'll just work with it, as opposed to just not knowing what's coming at you.
I'm sorry, did ambiguity sounded positive, or they said ambiguity sounded negative?
Negative.
Oh yeah, it does
Yeah.
sound negative because it sounds like you don't know what the heck you're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like,
And
hey,
I was
are
just
you a leader or what?
Right.
and I was just gonna say, as soon as you said expect, I think was what you just said, I immediately was like, the expectations is what so I think also creates like ambiguity, or not even that, but like positive or negative maybe. And I don't know that that's a good example, but I'm thinking like, so I'm starting to think about like next AmeriCorps steps, and I just recently had an interview today for a position, and they I think asked what like ideal supervision looks like, and I was like, oh yeah, great question, like in a perfect world. So I started by saying like, yeah, I like to kind of be like told what to do, but in a way that like I'm independent and I can still like do some work. And then after the conversation was going, and this person who was conducting the interview said something else, and I was like, I think what I was alluding to was like expectations. I like to know what the expectations are. So it seems similar in the sense of like, if it's unknown, it's ambiguous, like it could be negative, because I'm also framing it like this person has no idea, and they're kind of, because I feel like I've been in situations where the leader, supervisor has framed the ambiguous, like broad, do whatever you want, like as an empowering thing. But for some people, and like me at the time, it was my first VISTA role. So at the time I was like, this is horrible. Like I didn't like this. But like now, and I think throughout my professional career, like that will get easier and better to kind of navigate. But I think that's something that's like, to make decisions of like as the team and the collective, like there still needs to be kind of some purpose behind it, or like end goal, rather than just this ominous, because then I feel like it becomes ominous and you're like, so how, okay, like
Yeah.
what do we do about this? Like it's a good balance.
Well, and I think people are not comfortable or think that the word ambiguity is bad because we generally feel as though, well, we're supposed to know everything that's
Mhm.
coming or
Mhm.
everything that we're supposed to do. And so it doesn't leave room for an answer of, well, I don't know. And so, because I think we've gotten used to an expectation of,
Mhm.
well, I'm supposed to know everything. Or, and so the answer of I don't know seems to be less and less acceptable. Um, so I think that's why, or part of the reason why the word ambiguity feels negative is it's pointing out what we assume is inadequacy when it's really not. Like we've built that up in our head that, oh, well, I'm supposed to know all of this stuff when that's not always the case.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point what you're making. I think if you look at the opposite person, the person who tries to project as knowing it all, my grandmother would call it Mr. Kia,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Know It All, right? Um, it when you see that Mr. Kia, it actually you start becoming repulsed by him or
Mhm.
Mrs. Kia,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing. You don't know what you're doing. It's impossible to know it all. It's a
Right.
possibility. And so a true leader should really have the courage, should really be brave enough to say, we don't know what's exactly will be the path ahead, but we will prepare ourselves for whatever could come. And
Mm-hmm.
here's how we will prepare ourselves
Mhm.
based upon what we know so far.
Mhm.
And I think
Right.
that's where the ambiguity is there. How we balance ourselves based upon what we know at the moment
Mm-hmm.
and moving forward, right? And so I think um so that's that bullet there. Heightened ambiguity surrounding
Mm-hmm.
decisions and related outcomes and effects. So it's not that you're being so vague that like you're doing nothing, but
Mhm.
but you're not necessarily going to say we're going to do exactly this.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mhm.
like I'll go back to another scouting analogy. It's like, you know what? I'm going to put this and this and this in my ruck
Mhm.
because there's a good possibility I might need it on my journey.
Mm-hmm.
I might not, but what? I'll be prepared. You know,
Right.
um,
Mhm.
and as long as I'm prepared, I'll be able to face that challenge that's coming along.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't need it, great. So, and I think that's the key point. Leaders prepare for whatever possible challenge that's coming along, but they don't necessarily know what exact challenge. So if we look at, like, for the example, go back to not this previous administration, but the administration before, when they said, look, we know that there's going to be some kind of pandemic coming along, and they put into place a task force and said,
Mm-hmm.
hey, we need to do this, X, Y, and Z. And they built some stuff up. And that's the kind of thing, knowing that there's going to be something coming up. They built some kind of infrastructure. I'm not going to talk about what came afterwards, but but the idea that they anticipated, and initially, there was, what was it, the swine flu or whatever. They got hit by
Mm-hmm.
that they didn't anticipate. Lesson learned,
Mm-hmm.
made adjustments. Okay, there's got to be something else that's going to come along. What will we do to anticipate? Um, the DoD came out with flu kits and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
They had the two, and I know what was in those. There was a two N95 masks, two surgical masks, um, uh, come with some of this stuff in there, hand gloves, surgical gloves, that kind of stuff. And those were, they came with an NSN, a national stock number,
Mm-hmm.
that they could be issued out to family members and service members. Um,
Right.
so they were prepared. They had a stockpile
Mm-hmm.
and they were ready to go. So that's the kind of decision making and preparation that goes into after their lesson learned. But did they know when there's exactly when there's going to be something? No.
Right. I'll try to negate as much ambiguity as I can by expecting something, but not in a way that's like I'm a what ifer and I hold back myself because I think of everything that could possibly go wrong to the point where I'm um,
Driving everyone
like
crazy.
right, or even incapacitated. Like it is so overwhelming that I can't move, that I can't possibly think about, okay, what's the solution? What can I do
You
when
do a
I've
risk,
got like 100 what ifs?
you do a risk matrix.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you look at it and you do a risk matrix, and you say what are the risk scenarios, and then you do risk mitigation, and that's it.
Yep,
Um,
exactly.
project managers, program managers do that all the time. They say what's the probability of this? What's and they kind of assign risk, and that's it. And that's what leaders do. What's the probability? And guess what? That can shift.
Mm-hmm.
and you look at those kinds of things, right? And and the more input, that's why this idea of more stakeholders and this can
The
change.
better,
Yeah, that gives you a better picture. The more feeds you get, the more
right.
sensors you have, that's coming into that more diverse information. I'm part of diversity and DEI task force now in our council, and great. The more colors, I mean, it's not just colors of the rainbow. It's like, okay, religious, gender, colors. I mean, ages.
Mm-hmm.
You just start.
Yeah.
It's not just 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions. It's like all the dimensions.
Yeah, it's not just one. And for the longest time, even when we were talking about diversity in the 90s, it was very one-dimensional. It was race, and that was it.
Yeah.
So thankfully, that's expanded a lot more to be much more representative. But
Yeah, I was taking this DEI course, online DEI course, and they said, um, you know, would you accept? They showed a picture of like an old flip phone, and they said, would you work with a company that said this is the latest technology? You said no.
mm-hmm.
Great. Similarly, would you work if you thought that affirmative action? Remember that old phrase?
Mm-hmm.
That's not the latest. So we now are talking about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's the new model, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have to call it that's the new model because that's how our understanding of things at the moment is.
Right.
That could change.
Yeah, we went to Ally,
Right.
and what do they use in Green Dot? Something bystander.
So, a matter of fact, yesterday my CEO of my company came out and in anticipation of today's verdict said something about how we could be good allies, and
Mm-hmm.
he had a very nice message. I read it, and it was very, very, very good, about how we could be compassionate, or we could
Mm-hmm.
be dealing with the emotions of the verdict and things like that. And then I quickly rolled over as I took a nap before after work because it's Ramadan, and so I have to take a nap, and I was quickly read, and there was a Wall Street Journal article, and I think it was an opinion article. I have no idea because I just quickly wrote it, and it said, at least it was opinionated. It said, the headline was saying, police hardly ever get convicted,
Mm-hmm.
and
There's been 7 in the last 21 years or something like that.
yeah,
11 years. I
and
can't
they
remember.
said the jury faced a lot of pressure, so
Mm-hmm.
it was like, and so they were, and so that was the lead in the article.
Mm.
So I can just hear the talking heads now. Oh, that's the reason why it happened, is they were under pressure.
Yeah.
I mean, I can literally hear it right now. So that's the talking heads.
And the ally statement was from the CEO of Grant Thornton, or
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
curious. I was just curious because I'm gonna go look it up. But
Well, that was an internal thing, so I should.
oh, gotcha. Never mind.
Yeah. So,
Well, it's interesting that he used the term ally.
oh yeah, he's
Um,
very forward, very forward thinking. So I mean, I can't really, since it was internal, I can't say the whole shebang.
yeah.
But he said he used very good language and so forth, and talked from the allies and so forth. They might have an external statement, so you probably
Mm,
look up and see if there was an external statement. But they have there is a report. I was part of it, me personally. Grant Thornton did publish a DEI report, and I was
mhm,
actually part of that DEI report.
mm,
I think it's, if you look up on my LinkedIn profile, I posted it
mhm,
a month or two ago. So they're very forward thinking on
mhm,
very much on the forefront, I should say, on DEI. In fact, we're having a DEI conference. We already had one last past year. We're having another one this year, and they have it amongst four different groups. You know, like Pan Asian, African American, Native American, and then just one
mhm,
overall. And they also think of veterans as another
mm,
diversity group and so forth. And because I'm on the National Veterans BRG, Business Resource Group.
mhm.
That's why one of the reasons why I'm also very much included in all that diversity.
Of all of the kind of ally statements, like at least in the past, I don't know, 2 hours or so, that I was a little surprised by, just that they would make one, was the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Hmm.
And it was a very well written one. I was kind of surprised. Well, I mean, I follow the Penguins anyway, but it came up in my Facebook feed, and I'm like, I didn't expect a hockey team to make, a statement today. Um, it was yeah. Anyway, talking about allies and the use of the word, like uh, for the longest time, I really only thought about the word ally in terms of those that you're supporting, was more around the LGBTQ community. Like that's where I used ally the most, of
Mhm.
like, well, no, I'm not gay, lesbian, questioning, transgender, bisexual. So because I support like friends in that community, I am an ally. But I never thought of, well, all of my friends of color, I'm their ally. So it's just been interesting to see the word use of the word ally in a more diverse way, um, than what I'm used to seeing it in, if you will.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I know what you mean by that. It's they're using it in all shapes and forms these days.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of leaders as being, I mean, align and ally are totally different. Um, so we talked about the seven kind of qualities, and I thought all of them were very interesting, and I think change in priority, is in terms of like what's most important. Is it the knowledge, or um, is it the ethics? Is it, because I think for some, depending on the situation, the ethics, because there are differing views, maybe further down the line, and then in other situations, it's like number one, like that is what makes the decision for the rest,
Yeah.
are the ethical guidelines.
So this is a good one, right? Individually, you may disagree individually with a particular perspective.
Mm,
Like take a global leader who may say individually, say, you mentioned uh, lesbian, gay, whatever. Let's say a
mm,
global leader says, I personally don't like believe, I don't necessarily endorse that lifestyle, right? But maybe from a leadership perspective says, you know what? I'm there's I'm going to say that's a human rights issue at the same time, and so
mhm,
they still have human rights. So that, so maybe if they're like, let's like I'll take Joe Biden, for example, right? His, and I think that's a better way of good, better example. That's very much easy to use. His position on abortion says, I'm against abortion. He says that. He's very clear about that. But at the same token, he says, I'm not going to, I don't believe that it's government's right to be making that decision in that doctor's office or in the hospital. And that's an evolved decision. Like he evolved to that decision. Like he wasn't that way 20 or 30 years ago. Before he was very adamant against it. And for that reason, a lot of Catholics are very much upset with him about that, right? Because so he took that position because of his leadership, where he is from a leader. He's like, okay, as a leader, I'm like, so that's he moved. He moved. In other words, he moved from being a, what do you call it, a pro-life, what's called a pro-life, to a pro-choice. And pro-choice doesn't necessarily mean you're for
that you're pro-abortion. Yeah.
And that's what a lot of pro-life folks maybe don't get. You're for abortion. It just means that you're not.
Well, my sister and I would get into this argument many times. Just because you are, allowing for people to make that choice does not mean that you like it.
And right, because there's a lot of ethical dilemmas or a lot of nuances in those situations, right? What happens if she gets raped? What happens if there is a complicated medical situation? I had my half brother who they found out that the child had a very rare genetic disease that if he was born, probably wouldn't survive.
Right.
Or if it survived, it would have been it just would not have been a very quality of life issue. So they wound up terminating and it was very hard. I mean, my wife and I had a couple, I can barely say it, miscarriages. That wasn't
intentional. That wasn't planned. That wasn't a choice.
And it hurts to say it. So if that wasn't even a decision, and it hurts. Right. Imagine somebody who made that decision. I mean, they're hurting over it. So so when people say something like that, they're totally have no idea of the implications of such a thing. So that's where I think people don't have any understanding of these things.
Very side blinders, limit the information that they take in. Right. And that's very much what leaders don't do, right? They don't put their blinders on. They take in as much of a 360 as you possibly can.
You have to be a compassionate leader, right? And that's where I found I found a lot of compassion in Obama and Joe Biden. I found them to be very compassionate. And that's what I like about leaders who are very compassionate. They can take and say, you know what, it's not about my personal belief.
Right. What can be the best for the group? Yeah. It's like Walter Mondale passed away yesterday.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, that's a throwback. For the person who, like really built out an entire office to take on more, right? Like before, the vice president was like, nah, no, they didn't really do much of a much, yeah. But after Mondale,
and then he's the first person to actually even select a female for a vice president. I mean, everybody's like celebrating, oh, we have a female vice president, Kamala Harris. Did you forget that
Ferraro
was selected by Mondale? Had Walter Mondale actually won, we would have already had a female vice president a long time ago.
Yeah,
I
Carter
didn't
got the short
that.
end of that stick, and I think he paid for it a little. Other than his statement on taxes, when he was very blunt about taxes, that did him in. Like, I'm going to raise your taxes, and Ronald's going to raise your taxes, so I'm just telling you about it. Boom, crash and burn on that one. But there's, I think the value of honesty though has changed from a leader, right? There's more of an expectation when you compare this to 30, almost more than 40 years ago now, of someone just being open and honest, like, hey, we need tax revenue and we need revenue, period, and somebody's taxes are going to do that, as opposed to, hiding it. And now we expect the honesty. We expect people to be somewhat vulnerable, and we expect authenticity. But some of that may be just, again, the access to information, right? Before, 20 years ago, you could hide information. It wasn't easily accessible. There wasn't Google. There wasn't, well, there was the internet, but not the way we know it today of, well, now you just know everything about everybody if you want to. So I think we expect the authenticity, and we expect people to be more honest, or if we feel that they're not being honest, we can sure as heck find the answer around that honest response or dishonest response. So interesting kind of stuff, which I think mostly answers these questions, right, that we've highlighted here. Qualities that predispose leaders to act responsibly in a very complex, and when this article was written, there was not Twitter, there was not LinkedIn, there was Facebook, I think, or this chapter, but Facebook was really super young. So what qualities are we looking for in global leaders, in this kind of interconnected flat, if you want to look at, Friedrich, Friedrich, all right, flat world, and what can, or even specifically the organizations you work with, do to promote that skill development?
Yeah, and this article begins with talking about also the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and remember what was
Why
the movie?
SOX was
And do you
made
remember
off.
the movie that was what's his name was in? Because it was
Real specific there, Rashid.
I know Jim Carrey. It was basically an accounting firm that it was a whole corruption of an accounting firm that
Dick and Jane.
Yeah, Dick and Jane. That's the whole thing that do you have something to share? No. Can you bring something to share? That was the whole thing that basically precipitated the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, right?
That, and Madoff and a bunch of other things. Yeah, the affectionate socks. So what other qualities do we want folks to have, or that you as a global leader want to obtain, maintain, gain?
Well, as you're kind of just, well, I do want to quickly say, like, going back to the point of, I think, like, the adaptability and whether or not, like, what expectations are, that from the perspective where I was coming from, I think that's also a hard question for me to answer on the other end, because it can be kind of understood. Like, I always am trying to be aware of, like, don't get me wrong, I'm very flexible and adaptable in this role, and it's not from an overly optimistic way where I'm going to be like rainbows, like, yes, no, we're great, this is what we're going to do. but not overly like we have to plan for everything because chaos could happen at any minute. So like I feel like that's especially true after, you know, after so many things are changing. So I just was like have been thinking about that, but also how you're just saying, you know, now we do expect leaders to kind of be, I guess, authentic and transparent. And I'm just wondering if either of you can talk more about if you have examples of good leaders who aren't necessarily, because to me that is something that's also very important, and I don't know how I would be in a situation where they're not like as comfortable and confident as being transparent. So like even as I am looking for my next job and role, like I think that's also the kind of point I'm trying to get across of like the person can be however they are, the supervision can be certain things, like take it as you may, but like I do think, and also in like the workplace and the environment that I'm in, like that's something that I really value. And I don't know if that's like actually stemming from something else or if it's just like, no, I want to be able to kind of like, and maybe it's like like part of also me wanting to be able to see how I can help, or if not, but like, does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, like what it is exactly that makes someone an authentic leader. Yeah, it's a lot of different things, but I think at least to me and what I've tried to emulate is when I don't know something, I say that I don't know and I'm going to find out. And celebrating the good, but also letting people know real quick when stuff does not go as planned. If somebody tries to paint a rosy picture 100% of the time, I know that there is not 100% authenticity in that, because nothing is ever 100% perfect as planned on paper. It could be something as minuscule as we had to change how something was delivered or how something was given to participants, or you know, because people have a certain expectation. So I'm trying to think of an example one. I'm saying all of this in that, well, we budgeted for, let's say, $15,000 in sponsorships, and we're 2 months away from an event we've been planning for a year, and we're at, say, 10, and this is where we are. Should we let folks know more than 2 months before an event? Yep, because things are going to print, things are on websites, things are being promoted. So even what might seem to some people as a small thing, it's as soon as, I mean, if you back things out in terms of like at least plans, you know when they're supposed to happen, at least on average. And this, as soon as somebody doesn't start telling you that, then what else is there? So I always look for someone who at least gives me a little bit of, I don't know, or I'm not sure, or let's figure it out. But then also like gives you even just, even if it's small nuggets about themselves. If they're completely walled off as a person, it makes me a little uneasy. Like, what's, not that I want to know, like, you know, everything about a leader or a person. And I think that's why we get kind of, we want to know the small things of like, well, what's the so-and-so's, what's the president of the company's dog's name or kids, or, you know, just to know that they're a real person, that they have other things besides this role and besides this job, and seeing them from 8 to 5. And that's pretty, I don't know, I feel like that's basic, but if I don't get those two things out of somebody, I don't trust them.
So talking about trust, I think I may have mentioned I was.
Oh yeah, the new Covey book.
Yeah, the speed of trust. And so I was in charge. I'm in charge of a. We did a survey or engagement survey at our company, and then I I'm part of a council for advisory council. And so actually Thursday, I'm doing a town hall meeting for our Metro DC area. So I think that's probably going to be a couple, I don't know, 1,200 people or what have you.
Nice.
And I got to present, and I put the link to this. I put together this video. I put the link in the chat.
Oh, cool.
If you want to play it, and it's about leadership behaviors, and it's using the trust action plan. And I used branding from within Grant Thornton to talk about it. But if you want to look at it,
I don't know why it won't let me click out of it.
I
If
know.
anything.
I just realized that I had kept clicking it like as soon as you put it in the chat, and then I'm like, wait, it's not in one of my tabs.
Yeah.
But I just like clicked really, or like double clicked or whatever, and it just opened. So I was about to copy and paste. But very cool. I've never even heard of this platform either. This is very cool.
You have access to Powtoon. We've
I did.
started using it for future generations.
Oh, really?
Do we have access?
Yeah.
Very
We have the
cool.
education version. Yeah. If you
Because I can't. I didn't pay for this. This is just the free. So
yeah.
Wow.
I used the school version. I did a like campus Girl Scouts video, but yeah. So both of you, I think we're still using it. Like, so we've had access like for the education version through Future. So just FYI, email Kelly, I guess, or Paula.
please, because
I mean, it's still branded, so that's the thing. It doesn't get
I
you
don't
around
care.
the branding part.
I don't care. I just want this would be cool because
Would that be like if I log in like using my Future account, or it's something different?
It's something different. They have to set up, I forget how I got
Well-
it. They gave me a special URL to go to.
Okay.
but I did log in with my Office 365 account through my company. Well, that's how I created this account. So maybe they do use your
I created a separate like username, but it's tied to my Future anyway. Yeah, if you want that, Kelly, I think Paula, but I definitely know Kelly can give it to you. Yeah, I've got a Campus Girl Scout one. I feel like July of last year is so far away.
But take a look at this and see what you think. But I created this and everybody was so impressed. In fact, my company might use this nationwide. So
awesome.
So this is the kind of thing I was trying to allude to the fact, because I was trying to see if I could like use this kind of stuff for my independent study kind of stuff, because I'm doing a lot of this kind of stuff in my work. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you could totally. I will give this a play because I've already chewed up an hour of your all's time. So we're at 8:03. But I always can.
Only a minute.
I know there's you can always count on you all for some awesome conversation. So yeah, enjoy the rest of the article. Also, what you should see in Moodle is all of the readings for the rest of the semester. So those, and if you don't see them, please tell me, because at least when I pushed a bunch of buttons, they're supposed to be visible. So yeah, check that out. And if you have any questions too, just send them my way.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
Hope you all have a good week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.